The auditorium falls silent as Dr. Danielle Carter steps up to the podium, her presence commanding immediate attention. She's 41 years old, wearing a perfectly tailored burgundy blazer that radiates confidence earned through years of proving herself over and over again. In front of her sits the board of directors of Pinnacle Consulting Group, the same company that denied her promotions 5 times over 7 years. At the back of the room, David Hartwell, her former manager, shifts uncomfortably in his seat. He recognizes the woman on stage, but he's struggling to reconcile his memory of the promising but not quite ready employee with the internationally recognized leadership expert addressing his company's board. "Good afternoon," Danielle begins, her voice carrying the authority of someone who has earned the right to speak truth to power. "7 years ago, I sat in this building asking for opportunities to lead. Today, I'm here to teach leadership to the people who told me I wasn't ready." She pauses, letting the irony settle over the room. "My name is Dr. Danielle Carter, and I'm the founder and CEO of Elevate Leadership Solutions, a firm that specializes in identifying and developing overlooked talent in corporate America. Last year, we generated $47 million helping companies find the leaders they already had but couldn't see." David's face goes pale as he begins to understand who Danielle has become in the years since she left Pinnacle. The woman he'd passed over for promotion 5 times was now commanding speaker fees that exceeded what he made in a year. But this story doesn't start with triumph. It starts with a brilliant woman who believed that excellence would eventually be recognized, and a corporate culture that taught her that sometimes excellence isn't enough. This is another story from Touching Boss Stories channel. Please like, share, and subscribe. It encourages us to serve you with the best of stories. This is the story of how repeated rejection became the foundation for unprecedented success, how being denied a seat at the table led to building a better table, and how the woman they told to wait her turn eventually became the person teaching others how to recognize their own turn. Danielle Carter grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, where her grandmother, Betty Washington, cleaned offices in the same downtown buildings where lawyers and business executives made decisions that shaped the city's future. Betty would bring young Danielle with her during summer breaks, and while her grandmother emptied trash cans and dusted desks, Danielle would sit quietly in corners reading books and observing the people who seemed to control the world. "Baby girl," Betty would tell her during their bus rides home, "you pay attention to how those folks talk, how they carry themselves, how they solve problems. Not because you need to be like them, but because one day you're going to be better than them, and you need to understand how power works before you can change how it's used." Betty's words planted seeds that would grow into Danielle's understanding of corporate dynamics, leadership psychology, and the subtle barriers that kept talented people from reaching their potential. Danielle's mother, Dr. Patricia Carter, was a high school principal who had fought her own battles for recognition in educational leadership. Patricia had been passed over for superintendent positions 3 times before finally securing a role that allowed her to implement the innovative programs she'd been developing for years. "Excellence is never wasted," Patricia would tell Danielle whenever she faced setbacks. "Even when people can't see it immediately, it's building something inside you that will serve you when the right opportunity finally comes." Danielle excelled academically, graduating valedictorian from high school and earning a full scholarship to Spelman College, where she studied business administration and psychology. She was fascinated by organizational behavior, particularly the gap between what companies claimed to value and how they actually made decisions about talent and leadership. During her senior year, she wrote a thesis on unconscious bias in corporate promotion decisions that analyzed how subjective evaluation criteria often disadvantaged qualified candidates who didn't fit traditional leadership stereotypes. The research was groundbreaking, earning recognition from the Harvard Business Review and establishing Danielle as an emerging voice in organizational psychology. After graduation, she earned an MBA from Northwestern Kellogg, where she specialized in leadership development and organizational change. Her professors recognized her exceptional analytical skills and her unique ability to identify systemic problems that others missed. She graduated in the top 5% of her class and was recruited by several prestigious consulting firms. Pinnacle Consulting Group seemed like the perfect fit. They were a mid-sized firm specializing in organizational development, with a reputation for innovative approaches to leadership training and corporate culture transformation. During her interviews, they emphasized their commitment to diversity and their interest in fresh perspectives on traditional business challenges. Danielle accepted their offer believing she was joining a company that would value her insights about inclusive leadership and recognize her potential for advancement based on merit rather than politics. Her first day at Pinnacle should have been the beginning of a meteoric rise through the corporate ranks. Danielle walked into the modern Chicago offices wearing her best suit, carrying a portfolio filled with ideas she'd been developing since graduate school, ready to contribute to a company that claimed to be revolutionizing how businesses develop their human capital. The office environment seemed progressive, open floor plans that encouraged collaboration, diverse artwork celebrating different cultures, and a mission statement prominently displayed in the lobby that emphasized unleashing human potential regardless of background or tradition. Danielle was assigned to the Leadership Development Division, where she would work on designing training programs for corporate clients seeking to improve their management effectiveness and employee engagement. It was exactly the kind of work she'd prepared for her entire academic career. Her immediate supervisor was David Hartwell, a 38-year-old associate director who had been with Pinnacle for 6 years. David had an MBA from Wharton and a track record of successful client relationships, but his approach to leadership development was traditional and focused primarily on helping existing leaders become more effective rather than identifying new leadership potential throughout organizations. During Danielle's first week, David outlined her responsibilities and made it clear that Pinnacle valued team players who could execute established methodologies rather than disruptors who wanted to reinvent proven approaches. "We've been successful using tried-and-true methods," David explained during their initial one-on-one meeting. "I'm sure you have lots of fresh ideas from business school, but our clients trust us because we deliver consistent results using proven frameworks." Danielle nodded, understanding that David was establishing expectations about innovation and initiative. She decided to focus on executing existing programs excellently while quietly developing ideas that might eventually demonstrate the value of her perspective. But within her first month, Danielle began noticing patterns that concerned her. The leadership development programs that Pinnacle delivered to clients were effective but limited. They focused on developing people who already held leadership positions rather than identifying overlooked talent throughout organizations. She also noticed that Pinnacle's own internal promotion decisions seemed to follow the same limited patterns they were helping clients perpetuate. Leadership advancement opportunities consistently went to people who looked and sounded like the existing leadership team, while equally qualified candidates from different backgrounds were encouraged to continue developing their readiness. During her third month, when an associate director position opened up in the Leadership Development Division, Danielle decided to apply. She had been consistently exceeding performance expectations, receiving positive feedback from clients, and developing innovative program enhancements that were improving outcomes for their training initiatives. Her application included detailed proposals for expanding Pinnacle's leadership development offerings to include talent identification and inclusive leadership training, services that could differentiate them from competitors and meet growing client demand for diversity and inclusion expertise. The response was politely encouraging but ultimately disappointing. "Danielle, your work has been excellent," David told her during their feedback meeting. "Your proposals show real thinking and creativity. But Associate Director is a client-facing role that requires someone with more experience managing complex stakeholder relationships. What specific experience am I missing?" Danielle asked. "I've been leading client training sessions, managing program implementation, and receiving consistently positive feedback. It's not about specific deficiencies. It's about readiness for the next level. We want to make sure you have more opportunities to develop your leadership presence before taking on senior responsibilities." Leadership presence. The phrase was corporate code for subjective qualities that were difficult to define and impossible to develop if no one could explain what they actually meant. The position went to Marcus Chin, a colleague who had joined Pinnacle 6 months after Danielle but had been fast-tracked into increasingly visible project leadership roles. Marcus was intelligent and capable, but his qualifications weren't noticeably superior to Danielle's. The main difference was that David seemed more comfortable giving Marcus opportunities to demonstrate leadership presence, while encouraging Danielle to focus on continued development. If this story of talent meeting systemic barriers has you invested, please subscribe because what happens to Danielle over the next few years will show you exactly how persistence and excellence can overcome even the most frustrating obstacles. Have you ever been told you need more experience or development while watching less qualified colleagues advance ahead of you? Share your experience in the comments, because Danielle's journey is about to become a masterclass in turning rejection into rocket fuel. Danielle's second attempt at promotion came 18 months later, when the Leadership Development Division expanded and created 2 new Associate Director positions. By this time, she had established herself as one of Pinnacle's most effective program designers and facilitators. Her client satisfaction scores were consistently the highest in the division. She had developed 3 new training modules that were being implemented across multiple client accounts. Most importantly, she had begun incorporating research-based approaches to inclusive leadership that were generating measurable improvements in team performance and employee engagement. One of her most successful innovations was a leadership assessment tool that identified high-potential employees who might be overlooked by traditional promotion processes. The tool has helped 3 major clients discover and develop talented leaders from underrepresented backgrounds, resulting in improved business outcomes and enhanced company cultures. When Danielle applied for the Associate Director position this time, she included detailed case studies demonstrating how her inclusive leadership approaches were delivering superior results compared to traditional methods. She also presented a business plan for expanding Pinnacle's diversity and inclusion consulting services, which represented a growing market opportunity worth millions in potential revenue. The interview process was more extensive this time, including presentations to senior leadership and mock client meetings designed to evaluate readiness for increased responsibility. Danielle felt confident that her performance had clearly demonstrated her qualifications for advancement. The feedback meeting with David was longer and more detailed than the previous year, but the outcome was disappointingly familiar. "Danielle, your work continues to be outstanding," David began, his tone carrying the practiced sympathy of someone delivering unwelcome news. "Your innovative approaches are getting attention throughout the company, and clients consistently praise your program facilitation." Danielle waited for the inevitable "but" that she could hear coming. "But the senior leadership team feels that associate director roles require someone who can represent Pinnacle's brand and methodology to our most conservative clients. Some of your approaches, while effective, might be seen as too progressive for certain client environments." "Which client environments?" Danielle asked. "My client satisfaction scores suggest that my approaches are well received across different organizational cultures." "It's not about current satisfaction. It's about ensuring that we can place our associate directors in any client situation without concerns about cultural fit or methodology alignment." Cultural fit. Another phrase that sounded objective but functioned as a way to exclude people whose perspectives might challenge comfortable assumptions. Both associate director positions went to colleagues who had joined Pinnacle after Danielle, competent professionals who delivered solid results using established methods but hadn't demonstrated the innovation or superior outcomes that characterized Danielle's work. After the meeting, Danielle sat in her office staring at the case studies and client testimonials that apparently weren't enough to overcome subjective concerns about cultural fit. She began to understand that excellence wasn't a path to advancement if that excellence challenged existing norms rather than reinforcing them. Sarah Mitchell, one of the few other Black women at Pinnacle, stopped by Danielle's office later that afternoon. "I heard about the promotion decisions," Sarah said quietly. "I'm sorry. Your work deserved recognition." "What am I missing?" Danielle asked. "I'm producing better results than people who are advancing ahead of me. What else do I need to prove?" Sarah looked around to make sure they couldn't be overheard, then closed Danielle's office door. "You're not missing anything professional," she said, "but you're misunderstanding the game. This isn't about who's most qualified. It's about who makes the existing leadership team comfortable while they're making decisions about who belongs in leadership." "So what are my options?" "You can keep trying to be so undeniably excellent that they can't ignore you anymore. Or you can accept that some spaces will never be designed for people like us, and start thinking about building your own space." That conversation planted a seed that would grow into Danielle's eventual transformation, but she wasn't ready to abandon her belief that persistence and excellence would eventually be rewarded. Her third promotion attempt came 2 years later, when David Hartwell was promoted to director and his associate director position became available. This time, Danielle wasn't just qualified, she was the obvious choice. She had been functioning as David's unofficial deputy for months, managing complex client relationships, leading major training implementations, and mentoring junior consultants. Her inclusive leadership methodologies had become so successful that competitors were trying to replicate them, and several clients had specifically requested that Danielle lead their leadership development initiatives. More importantly, the business case for promoting Danielle had become undeniable. She had generated over $2 million in new revenue by developing diversity and inclusion consulting services that clients were increasingly demanding. Her programs had helped clients identify and develop leadership talent that traditional approaches missed, resulting in measurable improvements in productivity, retention, and innovation. The interview process for David's position included a presentation to Pinnacle's executive committee, where Danielle outlined her vision for expanding the leadership development division's impact and revenue. Her presentation included client testimonials, outcome data, and a strategic plan that positioned Pinnacle as the premier provider of inclusive leadership development services. The executive committee's response was enthusiastic. They asked detailed questions about implementation timelines, revenue projections, and client acquisition strategies. Several committee members commented that Danielle's approaches represented exactly the kind of innovation that would keep Pinnacle competitive in an evolving market. Walking out of that presentation, Danielle felt more confident than she had about any previous promotion opportunity. She had demonstrated not just competence, but vision and leadership that could drive significant business growth. The decision took 3 weeks, during which Danielle received encouraging feedback from colleagues who had heard positive comments from the executive committee. Several clients called to express support for her promotion, and junior consultants began approaching her with questions about career development, clearly expecting her to be in a position to provide guidance soon. When David called her into his office to discuss the decision, Danielle expected a conversation about transition timelines and new responsibilities. Instead, she received the most crushing rejection of her career. "Danielle, I want you to know that this was an incredibly difficult decision," David began, his discomfort obvious. "Your presentation was impressive, your results speak for themselves, and the executive committee recognizes your exceptional contributions to the company." The familiar, but hung unspoken in the air. "But we've decided to bring in someone from outside the company for this role. Jennifer Walsh will be joining us from McKinsey to serve as the new Associate Director for Leadership Development." Danielle felt the words hit her like physical blows. They weren't just passing her over for internal candidates, they were bringing in someone from outside rather than promoting the person who had been functionally performing the role for months. "Can you help me understand the reasoning?" Danielle asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt inside. "Jennifer brings a different perspective from her consulting experience at a premier firm. The executive committee felt that having someone with that background would enhance our credibility with Fortune 500 clients. And my track record with Fortune 500 clients doesn't demonstrate credibility?" David shifted uncomfortably. "It's not about your credibility. It's about bringing in fresh expertise that can take the division to the next level." Fresh expertise. As if Danielle's innovative methodologies and superior results somehow represented stale thinking that needed to be replaced by traditional approaches from established consulting firms. After the meeting, Danielle walked to her car in a daze. She sat in the parking lot for 30 minutes, processing the reality that 3 years of exceptional performance, innovation, and business results hadn't been enough to overcome whatever subjective factors were determining advancement decisions at Pinnacle. That evening, she called her mother for the first time in weeks. "How are things going with the promotion?" Patricia asked. Danielle broke down crying as she explained what had happened. Not just the immediate rejection, but the pattern of being told she was excellent while watching others advance ahead of her. "Baby," her mother said gently, "excellence is never wasted. Even when people can't see it immediately, it's building something inside you that will serve you when the right opportunity finally comes." "But when does the right opportunity come? How many times do I have to prove myself before someone recognizes what I can contribute? Maybe the right opportunity isn't about proving yourself to people who refuse to see your value. Maybe it's about creating opportunities where your value is obvious. Patricia's words echoed what Sarah Mitchell had suggested months earlier, but Danielle still wasn't ready to abandon her belief that persistence would eventually overcome prejudice. Her fourth and fifth promotion attempts followed similar patterns. Exceptional performance followed by encouraging feedback followed by decisions that defied logic based on qualifications and results. The fourth rejection came when a senior associate director position opened up, requiring oversight of multiple client relationships and strategic planning for the division's growth. Danielle had been informally performing these responsibilities for over a year, managing client relationships worth over $5 million annually and developing strategic initiatives that were driving business expansion. The position went to Marcus Chin, the colleague who had been promoted ahead of her 3 years earlier. His qualifications were solid, but he had never managed relationships at the scale that Danielle had been handling, and his strategic planning experience was limited to execution rather than development. The fifth rejection was the most devastating. When Jennifer Walsh left Pinnacle after 18 months to return to McKinsey, her associate director position became available again. This time, Danielle didn't just apply. She was actively recruited by senior leadership who acknowledged that she had been instrumental in maintaining client relationships and program quality during Jennifer's tenure. The feedback during the interview process was overwhelmingly positive. Multiple executive committee members expressed enthusiasm for Danielle's vision for the role and her track record of innovation and results. Client references were universally strong, with several Fortune 500 companies specifically requesting that Danielle be promoted to ensure continuity in their leadership development initiatives. When the rejection came this time, it was delivered not by David Hartwell, but by the executive committee chairman himself. "Danielle, we want you to know that you're valued tremendously by this organization," he began. "Your contributions have been essential to our success, and we see you as a key part of Pinnacle's future." "But," Danielle asked, no longer willing to pretend that encouragement without advancement meant anything. "But we're going in a different direction. We're restructuring the leadership development division to align with market trends, and we need someone with experience in large-scale organizational transformation." The position went to an external candidate with no background in leadership development but extensive experience in corporate restructuring, exactly the opposite of what clients were requesting and market trends were indicating. That night, Danielle sat in her apartment staring at 5 years of performance reviews that consistently rated her as exceptional, client testimonials praising her innovation and results, and a stack of rejection letters that made no sense based on any objective evaluation of qualifications. She finally understood what Sarah Mitchell had been trying to tell her. This wasn't about her readiness for promotion. This was about a system that would find reasons to exclude her regardless of her qualifications. But instead of feeling defeated, Danielle felt something she hadn't experienced before: clarity. The morning after her fifth rejection, Danielle woke up with a clarity that surprised her. Instead of the anger or despair she'd felt after previous disappointments, she felt something that could only be described as liberation. She wasn't going to spend another day trying to convince people of her value who had already decided not to see it. That evening, Danielle sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, a cup of coffee, and 5 years of ideas that had been developed, refined, and dismissed by people who couldn't recognize innovation when it challenged their assumptions. She began writing a business plan for something she'd been unconsciously preparing for since graduate school, her own leadership development consulting firm. The concept was both simple and revolutionary. Instead of helping existing leaders become marginally more effective, she would help organizations identify and develop overlooked leadership talent throughout their workforce. Instead of reinforcing traditional leadership stereotypes, she would prove that diverse perspectives produced better business outcomes. She called it Elevate Leadership Solutions because the name captured both her mission and her personal journey, elevating others the way she wished someone had elevated her. The first challenge was funding. Danielle had savings from her years at Pinnacle, but starting a consulting firm required capital for office space, technology, marketing, and most importantly, the financial security to survive while building a client base. Her grandmother Betty, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, provided both financial support and crucial advice. "Baby girl," Betty said during a video call from Birmingham, "I've been cleaning offices for 40 years, watching folks make decisions about who gets opportunities and who gets overlooked. You know what I've learned? The people making those decisions aren't smarter than the people getting passed over. They're just more comfortable with familiar faces. So how do I convince them to be comfortable with my face? You don't. You build something so good that they can't ignore it, and then you help other folks build things too. You don't need their comfort, you need their results." Betty's investment of $15,000, combined with Danielle's savings, provided enough capital to launch Elevate Leadership Solutions as a solo practice operating from her apartment. The next challenge was developing a client base without the institutional credibility that came from working at an established firm like Pinnacle. Danielle's approach was to start small and prove her methodologies with organizations that were already committed to innovative leadership development. Her first client was Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, who ran a community health clinic in Chicago. Lisa had heard Danielle speak at a professional development conference and was intrigued by her approaches to identifying leadership potential in non-traditional candidates. "We have amazing people working here," Lisa explained during their initial meeting. "Nurses who could run departments, community health workers who understand our population better than anyone, support staff who solve problems that our administrators don't even see. But our leadership development has been limited to people who already hold management positions." Danielle designed a comprehensive leadership assessment and development program that identified high-potential employees throughout the clinic's workforce. The program included mentoring, skill development, and opportunities for emerging leaders to take on increasing responsibilities. Within 6 months, the clinic had promoted 3 employees from non-management roles into leadership positions, resulting in improved patient satisfaction, better staff retention, and innovations in service delivery that saved the organization over $100,000 annually. More importantly, word of the clinic's success began spreading through Chicago's nonprofit and healthcare communities. Dr. Rodriguez became Danielle's first and most valuable advocate, speaking at conferences about how Elevate Leadership Solutions had transformed their organization's approach to talent development. Her testimonials led to inquiries from other healthcare organizations, social service agencies, and community development groups that were struggling with similar leadership challenges. But Danielle's real breakthrough came when she was invited to present at the Chicago Business Diversity Council, an organization that connected minority-owned businesses with potential corporate clients. Her presentation, titled "The Hidden ROI of Inclusive Leadership," demonstrated how organizations that effectively identified and developed diverse leadership talent outperformed competitors on measures of innovation, employee engagement, and financial performance. The audience included executives from several Fortune 500 companies who were under increasing pressure to demonstrate progress on diversity and inclusion initiatives that went beyond hiring quotas to actual leadership development. After her presentation, Danielle was approached by Michael Thompson, Chief Human Resources Officer at Meridian Financial Services, a regional bank with over 10,000 employees. "We've been struggling with leadership pipeline development," Michael explained. "We have talented people throughout the organization, but our traditional advancement pathways seem to consistently identify the same types of candidates for leadership roles." "What do you mean by same types?" Danielle asked. "People who look and sound like our current leadership team. We're missing opportunities to develop talent that might bring different perspectives and approaches to our business challenges." Meridian Financial became Danielle's first major corporate client, contracting with Elevate Leadership Solutions to conduct a comprehensive assessment of leadership potential throughout their organization and design development programs for high-potential employees who had been overlooked by traditional advancement processes. The Meridian project was complex and high-stakes. Danielle had to develop assessment tools that could evaluate leadership potential across different roles and departments, design development programs that accommodated diverse learning styles and career goals, and most importantly, prove that her inclusive approaches produced measurable business results. Working 16-hour days from her apartment office, Danielle created a leadership development system that was more sophisticated than anything she'd been allowed to build at Pinnacle. The system included psychometric assessments, 360-degree feedback tools, mentoring programs, and experiential learning opportunities that allowed emerging leaders to demonstrate their capabilities in real business situations. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Meridian's leadership pipeline expanded from 43 potential candidates to over 200, with representation across all demographic groups and organizational levels. More importantly, teams led by graduates of Danielle's program showed measurable improvements in performance, innovation, and employee satisfaction. Michael Thompson was so impressed with the outcomes that he began recommending Elevate leadership solutions to colleagues at other organizations. Within 18 months, Danielle had contracts with 8 major corporations and a waiting list of potential clients. But scaling beyond solo practice required expanding her team, which meant confronting the same hiring and development challenges that her clients faced. Danielle's approach to building her own team reflected everything she'd learned about identifying overlooked talent. Instead of hiring only from top consulting firms or prestigious business schools, she sought out professionals who had demonstrated excellence despite facing barriers similar to what she'd experienced. Her first hire was Marcus Williams, a brilliant organizational psychologist who had been underutilized at a major consulting firm where his research-based approaches were considered too academic for practical application. At Elevate Leadership Solutions, Marcus's research expertise became the foundation for evidence-based methodologies that differentiated them from competitors relying on outdated leadership theories. Her second hire was Sophia Chen, a former corporate trainer who had been passed over for promotion multiple times at her previous company despite developing innovative learning approaches that significantly improved program effectiveness. Sophia became Elevate's Director of Program Development, creating immersive leadership experiences that produced faster and more durable learning outcomes than traditional training methods. Within 2 years, Elevate Leadership Solutions had grown from Danielle's apartment to a professional office space with 12 employees and contracts worth over $8 million annually. But more important than the financial success was the proof that Danielle's inclusive leadership methodologies produced superior results compared to traditional approaches. Client organizations that implemented Elevate's programs showed statistically significant improvements in leadership pipeline diversity, employee engagement, innovation metrics, and financial performance. The data was so compelling that Harvard Business School invited Danielle to present a case study on inclusive leadership development at their annual leadership conference. Standing at the podium where some of the world's most respected leadership experts had spoken, Danielle presented research demonstrating that organizations prospered when they recognized and developed talent regardless of traditional leadership stereotypes. The audience of academics, consultants, and corporate executives listened with growing interest as Danielle outlined how systemic bias in leadership development was not just morally problematic but economically inefficient. Companies that persisted in promoting familiar types of leaders were missing opportunities to harness diverse perspectives that drove innovation and competitive advantage. The question isn't whether diverse leadership produces better outcomes, Danielle concluded. The research on that is clear. The question is whether organizations are willing to examine their own assumptions about what leadership looks like and commit to developing talent wherever they find it. The presentation was received with enthusiasm that surprised even Danielle. During the Q&A session, several Fortune 500 executives expressed interest in implementing Elevate's methodologies, and 3 business school professors inquired about incorporating her research into their curricula. But the most meaningful response came from Dr. Patricia Carter, Danielle's mother, who had flown to Boston to hear her daughter speak. "I'm proud of your success," Patricia told Danielle after the presentation. "But I'm proud of what you're building. You're not just helping organizations find better leaders, you're changing how leadership itself is understood." As they walked through Harvard's campus, Danielle reflected on the journey that had brought her from rejected employee to recognized expert. She thought about the 5 promotion denials that had felt like failures at the time but had actually been redirections toward something more important than advancing within someone else's system. "You know what's interesting?" Danielle told her mother. "I spent so many years trying to prove that I deserved a seat at their table. But building my own table has been more satisfying than any promotion could have been." 3 months after the Harvard presentation, Danielle received an invitation that would bring her story full circle. Pinnacle Consulting Group was hosting their annual leadership summit, and they wanted Danielle to be the keynote speaker. The theme was Innovative Approaches to Leadership Development in the Modern Organization. The irony was perfect. The company that had denied her 5 promotions now wanted to pay her to teach them about the innovative approaches they had refused to let her implement as their employee. But the invitation represented more than irony. It represented an opportunity to demonstrate how far she'd traveled and how much she'd learned about turning rejection into rocket fuel. Danielle accepted Pinnacle's invitation to keynote their leadership summit, but not for the reasons they expected. She wasn't interested in vindication or revenge. She was interested in using her platform to demonstrate what inclusive leadership actually looked like and to prove that the methodologies they had rejected were now being celebrated by their competitors. The weeks leading up to the summit were filled with preparation that went far beyond developing a presentation. Danielle was preparing to face an audience that included colleagues who had advanced ahead of her, executives who had denied her promotions, and most importantly, her former supervisor David Hartwell, who was now Director of Leadership Development. The summit was being held at the Palmer House Hilton in downtown Chicago, the same hotel where Pinnacle had hosted their annual events during Danielle's years with the company. Walking into the grand ballroom where she had once sat in the audience watching other speakers, Danielle felt the full weight of how dramatically her circumstances had changed. The audience consisted of Pinnacle's entire leadership team, their top clients, and invited executives from companies they hoped to attract as future customers. It was exactly the kind of prestigious, high-stakes speaking opportunity that had been denied to her when she worked for the company. As Danielle was introduced, she noticed several familiar faces in the audience. Marcus Chen, who had been promoted ahead of her multiple times, was sitting in the front row. Jennifer Walsh, who had been brought in from McKinsey to fill the role Danielle had been passed over for, was in the second row taking notes. And at the back of the room, David Hartwell sat with the uncomfortable expression of someone who was beginning to understand the magnitude of the opportunity he had missed. "Good afternoon," Danielle began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had earned her platform through excellence rather than politics. 7 years ago, I sat in this room as an employee of Pinnacle Consulting Group, listening to speakers discuss leadership development methodologies that I believed could be significantly improved. She paused, letting the personal context settle over the audience. Today, I'm here as the founder and CEO of Elevate Leadership Solutions, a firm that has proven those improvements work by helping organizations identify and develop leadership talent that traditional approaches consistently overlook. The room was completely silent, with audience members clearly understanding that they were about to witness something more complex than a typical keynote presentation. I want to start by sharing some data that might surprise you. Organizations that implement inclusive leadership development programs show an average of 37% improvement in innovation metrics, 29% improvement in employee engagement, and 22% improvement in financial performance compared to organizations using traditional advancement criteria. She clicked a slide showing research results from Elevate client organizations, including several companies that were represented in the audience. These improvements aren't theoretical. They're measurable outcomes from organizations that decided to expand their understanding of what leadership looks like and how to develop it effectively. David Hartwell shifted uncomfortably in his seat as he recognized the data that Danielle was presenting. These were the same methodologies she had proposed during her years at Pinnacle, refined and proven through implementation at organizations that had been willing to take risks that Pinnacle had avoided. "But I'm not here just to share research," Danielle continued. "I'm here to talk about the cost of overlooking talent, both for organizations and for the individuals whose potential goes unrealized." She clicked to her next slide, which showed a simple timeline. 5 years ago, I applied for my first promotion at Pinnacle Consulting Group. I was told that I wasn't ready, that I needed more development, that the timing wasn't right. Over the following 3 years, I applied for 4 additional promotions, each time receiving feedback that my work was excellent but that other candidates were better fits for the available opportunities. The audience was completely still, understanding that they were hearing the personal story behind the professional success they had been invited to learn from. During those 3 years, I developed leadership assessment tools that are now being used by Fortune 500 companies to identify high-potential employees. I created inclusive leadership training methodologies that have been implemented across multiple industries. I conducted research that has been published in Harvard Business Review and presented at international conferences. She paused, looking directly at David Hartwell before continuing. But according to the evaluation criteria used by my former employer, I wasn't ready for leadership responsibilities. The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by Danielle's next statement. I want to be clear about something. I'm not here to criticize Pinnacle Consulting Group or to relitigate past promotion decisions. I'm here to demonstrate what happens when organizations commit to recognizing and developing talent wherever they find it, regardless of whether that talent fits traditional leadership stereotypes. She clicked on a slide showing Elevate Leadership Solutions' client list, which included several organizations represented in the audience. Last year, Elevate Leadership Solutions generated $47 million in revenue, helping organizations implement the same inclusive leadership methodologies that I proposed during my time at Pinnacle. Our client retention rate is 94%, our program effectiveness ratings average 4.8 out of 5. And our methodologies have been adopted by organizations in 12 countries. Marcus Chen, who had been promoted ahead of Danielle multiple times, was taking notes frantically, clearly recognizing the business opportunity that his former colleague had captured. But the real measure of our success isn't financial, Danielle continued. It's the leaders we've helped organizations discover and develop. People who had been overlooked by traditional advancement processes but who possessed exactly the perspectives and capabilities their organizations needed to solve complex challenges. She shared case studies from several client organizations, including the Community Health Clinic where she had developed her initial methodologies and Meridian Financial Services, where her programs had transformed their leadership pipeline. What we've learned is that inclusive leadership development isn't just morally appropriate, it's strategically essential. Organizations that persist in promoting familiar types of leaders are missing opportunities to harness diverse perspectives that drive innovation and competitive advantage. As Danielle presented her research and client outcomes, the audience began to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented, a demonstration of what their own organization could have accomplished if they had recognized and developed the talent that had been sitting in their own offices. Jennifer Walsh, who had been brought in from McKinsey to lead initiatives that Danielle had been developing for years, raised her hand during the Q&A session. Dr. Carter, your methodologies are clearly effective, but how do you address concerns about implementation challenges in traditional corporate cultures that might be resistant to change? Danielle smiled, recognizing the question as an opportunity to address the exact concerns that had been used to justify rejecting her proposals years earlier. The implementation challenges are real, but they're not insurmountable. The key is demonstrating business value rather than just arguing for moral imperatives. When organizations see measurable improvements in performance, innovation, and employee satisfaction, cultural resistance diminishes quickly. She clicked on a slide showing implementation timelines and success metrics from organizations that had initially expressed concerns about cultural fit. What we've found is that resistance to inclusive leadership development often comes from fear of change rather than evidence of ineffectiveness. When organizations commit to trying new approaches and measuring outcomes objectively, the results speak for themselves. David Hartwell finally found his voice during the Q&A session, asking a question that revealed how much he had missed during Danielle's years at Pinnacle. Dr. Carter, when you were developing these methodologies, was there support you needed that might have accelerated your research and implementation? The question was clearly an attempt to understand where Pinnacle had failed to recognize the opportunity that Danielle represented. The support I needed was simple, Danielle replied, her voice carrying neither bitterness nor satisfaction, just factual clarity. I needed opportunities to test and refine my approaches in real client situations. I needed senior leadership willing to take calculated risks on innovative methodologies. Most importantly, I needed supervisors who could see potential rather than just familiar patterns. She looked directly at David as she continued. What I've learned since leaving Pinnacle is that talent development isn't just about individual growth, It's about organizational willingness to recognize and nurture innovation wherever it emerges. Organizations that create environments where diverse perspectives can flourish don't just develop better leaders, they become better organizations. The presentation concluded with Danielle outlining her vision for the future of leadership development, organizations that valued diversity of thought over familiarity of presentation, that measured leadership potential through outcome-based assessments rather than subjective comfort levels, and that understood that competitive advantage came from including rather than excluding diverse perspectives. As the audience applauded, Danielle felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with vindication and everything to do with demonstration. She had proven that the methodologies Pinnacle had rejected were not just viable but superior to traditional approaches. But more importantly, she had demonstrated that being passed over for opportunities that weren't designed for her had led to creating opportunities that were designed for everyone. After the presentation, several audience members approached Danielle with questions about implementing Elevate methodologies in their own organizations. 3 potential clients expressed immediate interest in contracting with her firm, and 2 business school professors asked about incorporating her research into their curricula. But the conversation that mattered most was the one that didn't happen. David Hartwell left the summit without approaching Danielle, clearly understanding that the moment for learning from his former employee had passed when he chose to overlook her potential years earlier. As Danielle gathered her materials and prepared to leave the Palmer House Hilton, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from the back row of this same ballroom to the keynote podium. She thought about the 5 rejections that had felt like failures at the time but had actually been redirections toward something more important than advancing within a system that couldn't recognize her value. Walking out of the hotel, Danielle understood that she had completed more than a professional presentation. She had demonstrated the power of turning rejection into innovation, of transforming being overlooked into creating space for others to be seen. 6 months after Danielle's keynote presentation at Pinnacle's Leadership Summit, the ripple effects of her demonstration were still spreading throughout the consulting industry. Her research had been cited in 12 academic papers, her methodologies had been adopted by organizations in 15 countries, and Elevate Leadership Solutions had grown to 35 employees with a waiting list of potential clients. But perhaps the most meaningful impact was the change in how organizations approached leadership development. Companies that had previously relied on traditional advancement criteria were implementing assessment tools that identified potential based on capability rather than familiarity. Danielle's office had moved from her apartment to a modern space in downtown Chicago, with conference rooms named after leaders who had overcome barriers to achieve excellence. Maya Angelou, Thurgood Marshall, Cesar Chavez, and her grandmother, Betty Washington. The walls displayed client success stories, research publications, and letters from individuals whose careers had been transformed by Elevate's programs. But the item Danielle treasured most was a handwritten note from Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, her first client at the community health clinic. "You didn't just help us find better leaders," the note read. "You taught us to see leadership differently. The people you helped us recognize and develop are now helping others in ways we never imagined possible." That transformation, from finding leaders to creating leaders to developing other leader developers, represented the true impact of Danielle's work. 3 months after the Pinnacle presentation, Danielle received an unexpected phone call from Marcus Chen, the colleague who had been promoted ahead of her multiple times during their years together at the firm. "Danielle, I wanted to reach out because I've been thinking about your presentation," Marcus said. "I realized that I never understood how your approaches worked because I never took the time to really listen to what you were proposing. What made you think about it now?" Danielle asked. "I'm implementing some of your methodologies with my own clients, and the results are remarkable. I'm seeing leadership potential in people I would have overlooked using traditional assessment criteria." Marcus paused before continuing. "I also realized that I benefited from a system that prioritized people like me over people like you, and I never acknowledged that or thought about what it cost the organization." The conversation was awkward but necessary, representing the kind of honest self-examination that Danielle believed was essential for real change in corporate culture. "I appreciate you calling," Danielle replied. "Change happens when people are willing to examine their own assumptions and commit to doing better." Would you be willing to mentor me on implementing inclusive leadership development? I want to learn how to do this work properly." Danielle considered the request carefully. Marcus represented exactly the kind of well-intentioned leader who could either perpetuate problematic systems or help transform them, depending on his willingness to do the difficult work of recognizing and addressing his own biases. "I'd be happy to provide guidance," she said. "But mentoring isn't just about learning new techniques. It's about fundamentally changing how you see leadership potential and being willing to advocate for people who don't look or sound like traditional leaders." 6 months later, Marcus had become one of Elevate Leadership Solutions' most effective collaborators, helping traditional consulting firms understand how to implement inclusive methodologies without losing credibility with conservative clients. But the most significant validation of Danielle's work came from an unexpected source. Harvard Business School invited her to serve as a visiting professor, teaching a course on inclusive leadership development in global organizations. Standing in the same lecture hall where she had presented as a guest speaker 2 years earlier, Danielle looked out at a classroom full of MBA students from around the world, future leaders who would shape organizational culture for the next generation. Leadership development has traditionally focused on identifying people who look and sound like existing leaders. She began her first lecture. But what if we approached it differently? What if we focused on identifying people with the perspectives and capabilities that organizations actually need to solve their most complex challenges? One student, a young black woman from Nigeria, raised her hand. "Professor Carter, how do you help organizations recognize their own biases when those biases are often unconscious?" Danielle smiled, recognizing herself in the student's question. "You start by demonstrating that inclusive approaches produce better outcomes than exclusive ones. When organizations see measurable improvements in performance, innovation, and employee satisfaction, they become more willing to examine their assumptions about what leadership looks like." Another student, a white man from Boston, asked, "What about resistance from leaders who feel threatened by changes to advancement criteria?" "Resistance is natural when people feel like change threatens their advantages," Danielle replied. "But the goal isn't to take opportunities away from anyone. The goal is to expand opportunities for everyone by recognizing that diverse perspectives strengthen organizations rather than weakening them." Teaching at Harvard allowed Danielle to influence how the next generation of business leaders understood talent development, organizational culture, and the relationship between diversity and competitive advantage. But her most personal satisfaction came from the mentoring relationships she developed with students who reminded her of herself, brilliant individuals whose potential might be overlooked by traditional leadership assessment criteria. 1 year after joining Harvard's faculty, Danielle received a letter that brought her story full circle. It was from David Hartwell, her former supervisor at Pinnacle Consulting Group. "Dear Danielle," the letter began, "I wanted to reach out because I've been thinking about the opportunities one missed during your time at Pinnacle. Not just the opportunities to recognize and develop your talent, but the opportunities to learn from your approaches and implement methodologies that could have made our organization more effective." The letter continued with a detailed acknowledgement of how David's limited understanding of leadership potential had cost both Danielle and Pinnacle significant opportunities for growth and innovation. "I'm writing to ask if you would be willing to consult with Pinnacle on implementing inclusive leadership development programs," David continued. "I understand that we lost the right to your expertise when we failed to recognize it as employees, but I'm hoping you might be willing to help us become the kind of organization we should have been all along." Danielle considered the request for several weeks before responding. Working with Pinnacle would represent a full-circle moment, but it would also require careful consideration of whether the organization was genuinely committed to change or simply trying to access her expertise without acknowledging their past failures. Her response was gracious but clear about the conditions under which she would consider such a partnership. "Dear David," she wrote, "I appreciate your letter and your willingness to acknowledge past mistakes. I would be open to discussing a consulting relationship with Pinnacle, but such a partnership would need to be based on genuine commitment to transforming organizational culture rather than simply implementing new assessment tools. Real change requires examining why qualified candidates were overlooked, addressing the systemic factors that perpetuated exclusion, and committing to ongoing measurement and accountability to ensure that inclusive practices become permanent rather than temporary. The consulting engagement that followed became a model for how organizations could acknowledge past failures while committing to future excellence. Pinnacle implemented comprehensive bias training, restructured their promotion criteria to focus on capability rather than familiarity, and established accountability measures that tracked their progress on developing diverse leadership pipelines. Most importantly, they hired Sarah Mitchell, Danielle's former colleague, as Director of Inclusive Leadership Development, creating opportunities for someone who understood both the challenges and the solutions from personal experience. 5 years after being denied her 5th promotion at Pinnacle, Danielle was invited to speak at the company's annual meeting, not as a keynote speaker addressing external audiences, but as a consultant presenting results from the transformation initiative she had led. The changes we've implemented over the past 18 months have resulted in a 43% increase in leadership pipeline diversity, a 31% improvement in employee engagement scores, and identification of leadership talent that our previous assessment methods consistently missed, she reported to Pinnacle's board of directors. But the real measure of our success will be what happens over the next 5 years, as leaders developed through inclusive processes take on increasing responsibilities and demonstrate the value of diverse perspectives in solving complex business challenges. As Danielle concluded her presentation, she looked around the boardroom where decisions about her career had once been made without her input. Now she was sitting at the table as an expert, helping to shape policies that would determine opportunities for the next generation of talented individuals. After the meeting, she walked through Pinnacle's offices, past the cubicle where she had once sat wondering when her excellence would be recognized, past the conference room where she had received 5 rejection letters that had initially felt like defeats but had ultimately become redirections toward something more meaningful than any promotion. Standing in the lobby where Pinnacle's mission statement emphasized unleashing human potential regardless of background or tradition, Danielle reflected on the journey that had brought her from overlooked employee to recognized expert. She thought about her grandmother Betty, who had taught her that excellence always finds a way to be heard, even when it takes longer than expected. She thought about her mother Patricia, who had shown her that persistence and innovation could overcome even the most frustrating obstacles. She thought about all the individuals whose careers had been transformed by learning to see their authentic selves as assets rather than obstacles. Most importantly, she thought about the future, a business world where talent would be recognized based on capability rather than familiarity, where diverse perspectives would be valued for their contribution to innovation and problem-solving, and where the next generation of leaders would include everyone with the vision and determination to make organizations better. The woman who had been told she wasn't ready for leadership had become a leader who helped others discover their own readiness. The employee who had been passed over 5 times had created opportunities for countless others to be seen, developed, and elevated. In the end, Danielle's story wasn't about the promotion she was denied, it was about the potential she unleashed, both in herself and in every organization committed to recognizing excellence wherever it emerged. Excellence wherever it emerged. If this incredible story of transformation and the power of turning rejection into innovation has inspired you, please subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their potential isn't determined by other people's ability to recognize it. What talent have you been told isn't ready? What promotion have you been denied despite exceptional performance? How will you use Danielle's example to transform rejection into rocket fuel for building something better? Share your commitment to unleashing overlooked potential in the comments, because the world needs leaders who recognize excellence in every form it takes.